The Echo Chamber Part 1. The vanishing Vivian Price had always been captivated by stories of the missing. As the host of Vanished, a popular true crime podcast, she delved into the eerie world of disappearances, unraveling the chilling threads of cases that often left more questions than answers. Her voice, a soothing, compelling cadence, had become the soundtrack to many listeners' nights. But now, the city around her was slipping into a growing darkness. People were vanishing, and not in the dramatic fashion that normally captivated her audience. No abductions, no ransom notes, just silence. A young woman had disappeared on her walk home. A street vendor was found gone without a trace, his stall still intact, as though he had simply ceased to exist. Detective Inspector Mallory Briggs had been assigned to the cases. She'd seen her fair share of the inexplicable, but something about these vanishings gnawed at her. The city felt wrong. The air was too quiet. Vivian felt it too, though she wasn't yet sure how to explain it. She was following the case from her studio, microphone close, headphones on. She pored over police reports, interviewed witnesses, and crafted her next episode with eerie precision. Until one morning, she received an email. It was a single audio file with no subject. The message within was an unsettling collage of sounds: the rumble of the subway, the distant wail of a siren. But there was something else. Her voice, distorted and woven into the sounds. Words she recognized. Vanished, without a trace. The silence is deafening. Her heart froze. At first, she thought it was a prank. But then the next disappearance happened. The same day she'd listened to the file, a barista she'd often seen at a coffee shop near her studio vanished. Could the file be linked to the disappearances? Part 2. The whispers. Vivian couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange occurrences followed her. A shadow lingering outside her window. A car that seemed to follow her after she left her apartment. Even her podcast's audience, once just a quiet community, now felt more like a potential threat, as though every listener was a lurking presence, consuming her every word. She turned to Detective Briggs. The skepticism in the detective's eyes vanished the moment she listened to the recording. "Whoever this is," Briggs muttered, "they know you, and they're using your voice." That's when Vivian realized the true horror. The disappearances weren't random. Someone was using her own podcast as a weapon, manipulating her words into a deadly lure. She had become part of the killer's symphony. Vivian dug deeper, uncovering stories about sound manipulation, how frequencies could influence the mind. She learned that certain frequencies could disorient people, even cause hallucinations or induce a state of heightened suggestion. This was no ordinary crime spree. This was an attack on the very essence of human perception. Part 3. The Resonance. As days passed, the pattern became clearer. The victims were linked to episodes of Vanished, their disappearances coinciding with specific broadcasts of Vivian's podcast. The killer wasn't just following her show. They were using it as a map. Each victim was a piece in a puzzle, and her voice was the thread that tied them all together. Vivian's words had become a weapon, her theories a guide for the killer. But why her? She'd never known any of the victims personally. Why would someone target them because of her podcast? The answer came slowly. The killer was no mere random fan. They were someone who had been listening closely, someone who had been tracking her for months, perhaps even years. And now, they were using her voice to orchestrate the disappearances. The next message was even more chilling. A voice in the recording, clear and unmistakable, invited Vivian to meet. A location was given: an abandoned theater, one she had mentioned in an early episode. A place known for its dark history, its strange acoustics. It was a trap. Part 4. The Trap. The moment Vivian stepped into the theater, she felt it: a heavy, unnatural silence, as though the building itself was waiting. Detective Briggs and her team were stationed nearby, ready for action. But Vivian knew that this time, it would be different. She was walking into the killer's domain. The theater was a maze of sound. The acoustics in the room made every footstep echo like 100. Voices whispered from the walls. The killer had turned the building into a sonic labyrinth. Vivian's heart raced as she heard her own voice replaying, distorted, twisted, her words amplified, ricocheting off the walls, cutting through her mind like a blade. The killer had turned her voice against her, using the very thing that had made her a target to overwhelm her. But Vivian had spent years in this world. She knew how to use sound. She could fight back. She called out, her voice steady, despite the pounding fear in her chest. "If you think you control the sound, you're wrong," she said into the microphone that had been hidden in her hand. "You'll never control the truth." Her words rang out, amplified through the speaker system. She wasn't just speaking to the killer. She was speaking to her listeners, those who had been following her investigation, those who had been touched by the silence of the vanished. Her voice broke through the distorted frequencies. Her words became a beacon, cutting through the killer's illusions. The walls seemed to shudder, the sonic labyrinth faltering. She heard the killer, frantic, trying to counter her broadcast. But it was too late. The sound of her voice, the very thing that had made her vulnerable, was now their undoing. Part 5. The Echo. The police stormed in, surrounding the killer in the darkened theater. Detective Briggs pulled the killer out of the shadows, a former sound engineer, whose obsession with manipulating frequencies had twisted into madness. As they dragged the killer away, Vivian stood still, trembling. The silence of the city had been broken, but the echoes of that silence would haunt her forever. The killer's twisted use of sound had not only taken lives, but had come dangerously close to claiming her own. Vivian's podcast was never the same after that. She had stared into the abyss of sound manipulation and come out changed. Now, she was more than just a voice on the airwaves. She was a living testament to the dangers of the power hidden in the frequencies. Her last episode was a tribute to the vanished. As her voice echoed through the speakers, it carried a new weight tone that would resonate long after the final words were spoken.